Welcome back to my channel, Scribes. It's Pika Lee, and today I've got a great video for you based off of a comment left for me that I thought was just such a great topic to hit. And this was inspired by this commenter here who asked, should I copyright my script before I send it in for consultancy? Now, if you're struggling with the question yourself, should I copyright my script before I send it out to any sort of place, whether that's for coverage, feedback, or into a competition, stick around because we're going to cover that and more as we talk about copyright and screenwriting. So a few of the things I want to cover today is basically what is copyright, what are the terms of the copyright, and how are the different ways that you can actually copyright your work. And this is pertaining specifically to screenwriting. This can, of course, apply to anything else creative because that is our copyright law. But for the most part, I'm going to be talking about primarily the ways that you can copyright your works for screenwriting. I also want to cover submissions and copywriting and coverage and copywriting and what that sort of means. I just want to throw a little disclaimer that this is in no way legal advice. All of this information is available to you online, and I will go ahead and place my sources down below. But also, just in case you are sort of looking for more information and you have a project that you're really curious about and you want to submit to something, I highly suggest you make sure to contact an entertainment lawyer. They are well versed at all of the entertainment contracts, and they're able to easily go through that with you and offer you some advice. Now, that does come with a cost, so do be prepared for that. They don't usually work for free, as most people in this industry don't. And of course, we do want to be respectful of their time and actually pay them for their services. Now, what is copywriting? Copywriting is traditionally used to protect your works creatively in the medium or format that it is placed in and make sure that it is safe from infringement. This typically assists with bringing any sort of litigation against someone who may have stolen your intellectual property or your creative works. Now, this does not cover ideas. This covers a body of work. So you will have to have a physical format of something. And that means that it has to be in the form of a manuscript, a script, document, teleplay, a treatment, or a character breakdown that is significant and iconic in a way in which your specific works is being expressed. Copyright's primary function is being the proof of authorship. This means it's associating a date, a time with which you've recorded your work and you as the author, so that if you should need to legally or in any sort of way prove that you are the author, you do have that proof because it has been registered legally or it has been registered in some other form to prove that you are the primary author. At the moment, there are a few different ways that you can copyright your script. The first way would be with the Library of Congress. But outside of this, there are many countries who have their own form of governmental records that will go ahead and provide you registration for your works. And the US happens to actually work in tandem with any other country as far as copyrights. So it's not as if your copyright does go over to another country and transfer over, but for the most part, if you have registered your works in the US and you do happen to find that there is another country in which someone is infringing on your rights, you may absolutely take it up with that court of law and see if they would work in partnership with your records to verify that you are the actual owner of that work. When registering your document with the US Library of Congress, you will be able to do an online form in which you will create an account and be able to register for a fee your body of work. The fee is about $125 and it gives you a certificate of registration. When copying with the US government, you are securing the copyrights for the life of the author plus about 70 years. This time frame can change in years depending on certain criteria, such as the case with Disney, in which they have the 95-year copyright. Just know that when you copyright your work, it is going to be based off of the actual copy that you've submitted, so that particular draft. Alternatively, you do have what has been deemed the poor man's copyright, which is printing out a physical copy and mailing it to yourself. And of course, the most important part, don't open it. Now, the reason that you don't open this is because once you send this to you, it's got a timestamp and a date stamp on it. And that is provided by the post office. And once you receive that copy, it's going to be stamped with that and sealed. Now, by doing this, you are actually securing a time and date, sort of a registration that's unofficial to prove that you have actually sent it and created it on about this date. This form of copyright is still pretty relevant today because you can absolutely have a physical hard copy should anything else fail, as far as having your document saved digitally and having it registered and not being able to retain a record of it. Of course, with the advances of digital technology, it's not exactly needed anymore. And by that I mean, right now, I can create a document on my computer and I can write maybe 3 words, and that shows a timestamp and a date for which I've created that document that is sort of the metadata of that document for pretty much the duration of its life. And from there, I do have a way of pulling up a record in some sort of fashion digitally that shows that I have created that work on this date at that time. So now I guess we just have a sort of digital artist copyright. Of course, it's also the really affordable way. The very last way in which you can copyright your script would be registering it through the WGA, which is the Writers Guild of America. Now, we do have 2 Writers Guilds of America, and that is East and West. You can absolutely register this with either one, no matter which side of the actual states you do live on. Now, through the WGA, it is valid for about 5 years, that registration, and it will cover you for specifically the same exact reasons, although again, not as high tier as having this with the Library of Congress, because they respect and honor that record of certification a lot more because it is registered the proper way with the government and will be recognized a lot better in court, should you ever have to go to court. But the WGA does a fantastic job also of keeping that record for you. And might I add, at a cheaper price of $25. I personally have copywritten through the WGA as well. I've done this through the WGA East. As well, you do not have to be a member of the WGA to actually register your script with them. And it does not mean that once you register it, you are part of the Writers Guild of America. So on to the question, do I need to copyright my script when sending it out for submission? Now, if you're submitting a script unsolicited to an agent, a manager, or a production house, absolutely have it in some fashion copywritten. Of course, my biggest recommendation for sending a submission would be to honor the system of having it in the Library of Congress, pay that $125, and make sure that you have every protection you can for that piece of work in which you've worked so hard to create. You want to make sure that you have every single thing lined up legally so that you can protect yourself. It's not to say that everyone's going to steal your idea and your script, but it is to say that they go many different lengths to make sure that they are protected in the same way that you should also make sure you are protected in. Many companies do not want to look at unsolicited works for the copyright infringement laws. They will absolutely have you sign a release saying that you are not going to hold them liable if they produce something very similar the next month. They are really hesitant to want to risk a lawsuit in that case. Yes, that's right, companies are actually afraid of you. Another highlight about submissions is you should be reading any sort of forms or agreements given to you. And this is because I was going to submit something to a competition, and this was for Imagine x Netflix. So Imagine, the company for Ron Howard, got together with Netflix to create sort of this incubator where they have writers submit concepts that could possibly be produced in agreement with Netflix. Once it was sort of put through a few different rounds of mentorship that was provided by Imagine. I read through all of the policies just to see if I can find a little bit more about what sort of agreements I was entering into by submitting my work. An interesting part of the contract for the Imagine X Impact initiative was that it does state right in the beginning that if you do not understand this agreement, to have an entertainment lawyer take a look at it, or don't sign the agreement. Well, guess who didn't sign the agreement? This girl. Now that's not because I didn't find their agreement to be good enough. It's because there were a few clauses that were mentioned that I did not understand, and I wasn't sure if the ownership and rights transferred to anyone at any point. And because of this, I didn't want to enter into that sort of agreement if I wasn't quite sure. And that's what I mean by just reading the policies to find out a little bit more about what you're signing and what sort of rights you're giving as far as ownership rights and who retains those. Now, if we're talking coverage and copyrights, I just want to say that most likely you'll see this in the FAQs, or you'll see it in the forms that you're signing when you're submitting your work for coverage. And that's going to be sort of the details around the legalities between their reader reading your original work and giving you back your feedback, while also not retaining any of the ownership to your original work. So yes, there will be clauses in there that state that they do not own your work by reading it. With coverage though, I do highly recommend that you do your research. Now, pretty much every reader who is employed by a company for coverage or notes has signed an agreement prior to behind the scenes that is stating they will not do anything that could be any sort of misconduct towards stealing or keeping a person's creative works. And that is because the company who's entering into the contract with the client for a service has agreed that they will not steal or take or retain ownership or rights of their personal works. Now, I can't verify this for sure at every single company. Do your research. Finally, my thoughts on copyright. You have heard that I have used the WGA East as a way to copyright my script, and this was in the earlier days when I had a very early draft. Now, at the stage that I'm at, I would kick myself for that earlier draft even being considered a copyrightable sort of body of work. And that's mostly because I had a lot of work that needed to be done to it, and so it has changed immensely, in which the copyright is no longer really effective for me because there's such substantial changes to it now. It wouldn't even be the same work anymore. Consider if it's ready to be copywritten. I know that it's really hard to figure out when's the stopping point and when is it ready for being produced, but I'd say that a good stopping point is when you feel like it's ready and it's polished enough to go into competitions and on submission. For many advanced screenwriters, they'll know when it's right to copyright their work. For many of the newer or intermediate screenwriters, it's a little bit more complicated and complex because you're not quite sure when it's ready and when it still needs a little bit more work, because for the most part, it always feels like it needs work. But I'd say if all of your major changes have occurred, you've locked in your characters, you've locked in your storyline, your plot, your arcs, you might be at a pretty good point, especially if you're only just touching up very few details and descriptions within your script. With experience, this gets less complicated, trust me. Now, for coverage, I typically don't like to copyright any of it because I'm actively looking to change it. And if I'm looking to change it, copywriting it before I get to change those major components isn't going to do me any good at all. I also haven't majorly copywritten my work with the Library of Congress, and that's mostly because all of my works are not at the point in which I want to submit it to a production house, a manager, or an agent. And so at the moment, since I have no need for that, I don't want to spend the money when I can wait until it's at a great place, it's best work possible, and then I can go ahead and get that copywritten. Also, for competitions, because they're well-known competitions that I traditionally sign up for, and because I rarely do enter into competitions in general, I also don't copyright them because, again, for the purposes of submitting them, I know that they're not where they need to be. A lot of times I do check into the policies of competitions, and competitions also don't retain ownership to your story or your body of work. And so it's comforting for me to see that already in their agreements so that I can bring that back up at any point in time. As this is my personal choice in not copywriting for the majority of what I sign up for, instead just reading the agreements and making sure I'm comfortable enough with that particular place that I'm submitting to and that particular agreement, I definitely think that it's worthwhile for you to figure out what your goals are and how you feel about submitting to specific places without that copyright. I am taking a risk, absolutely, but it is my risk to take. And so now you have a choice. You can choose to go either way as well. Copyright is very complex, but very crucial to an artist's life and very crucial to protecting your intellectual property and your work. So definitely put the time and put the knowledge into researching anything that you're not clear about before you submit to any place, because it's more important that you feel comfortable with any sort of risks that you take and comfortable working in this field. And by the way, I hope you noticed my lovely shirt, Storytellers Are Magic, which is now in my Etsy shop. You can find that linked down below if you want your own. And I hope that you enjoyed this video today. Remember to like and subscribe to make sure you catch any other videos that I put out, or take a peek at some older videos and see if you want to study to any of my Write With Me videos that'll be linked down below also. I will see you all on the next one.